Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. So today we're going to be doing a deep dive into something that you requested, and that is the caste system in modern India. And you shared some really interesting articles and research with me, and I'm super excited to have our expert here to really kind of unpack this with us. And we're going to focus on two main questions that you had. One, why do some members of the upper caste in India still want the caste system? And two, does the caste system kind of lose its value when Hindus relocate to other countries? So buckle up, because this is a topic that's really fascinating, but it can also be a bit complex. So
Absolutely. It's a sensitive topic. And
yeah.
it's important to approach it, I think, with sensitivity and a genuine desire to understand the different perspectives at play.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. So just to kind of set the stage for us, can you give us a little bit of a rundown of the caste system's historical roots? I know it goes way back.
Yeah, it does. It goes way back. We're talking over 2,000 years old. It started with this thing called the Varna system, which divided society into four main groups. The Brahmins, priests and scholars; Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers;
Mm.
Vaishyas, merchants and traders; and Shudras, laborers. But over time, it morphed into a much more intricate system with countless subcastes called Jatis. And these Jatis became hereditary, so your caste was determined at birth. And that solidified a very rigid social hierarchy.
Wow, so basically like your occupation and even your social standing was basically predetermined. Then the British came along during colonial rule. What impact did they have on the caste system? So they didn't create a bit.
They didn't create, no,
Oh,
but they certainly used it to their advantage. They documented and categorized the different castes, often reinforcing existing hierarchies and sometimes even creating new ones. And this helped them control the population and maintain their power during their rule.
it's so fascinating how historical forces can shape social structures in such profound ways. But then, after India gained independence, the Constitution aimed to abolish caste-based discrimination, right?
That's right. The Indian Constitution, adopted in 1950, is a powerful document. It guarantees equality for all citizens, prohibits discrimination based on caste, and even established reservation policies to uplift marginalized communities. Articles 15 and 17, for example, are specifically designed to prevent discrimination based on caste.
Okay, so that sounds like a huge step toward, dismantling the system.
Yeah.
So with all of these measures in place, why is there still this desire, particularly among some members of the upper caste, to preserve the caste system? Like what are some of the motivations behind that?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, and it's not a simple one to answer. It's a complex web of social,
Economic?
political.
And even religious factors.
Yeah.
But let's start with perhaps the most obvious, the preservation of privilege. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. So you're saying some see the caste system as a way to protect their advantages that they've had historically.
Exactly. The caste system has historically provided social, economic, and political advantages to those in the upper castes. And they may worry about losing those benefits if the system were to truly disappear.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it's about holding on to power and influence.
Mhm.
But is it just about economics? What about the social aspects of it?
Yeah, social dynamics play a huge role as well. The caste system, for all its faults, provides a framework for social order and hierarchy, a way of structuring society. It dictates roles, responsibilities, and even social interactions.
So for some, it's about maintaining a sense of order and stability, even if that order is inherently unequal.
That's one way to look at it. And it's important to remember that for some, caste is deeply entwined with religious beliefs and practices. They might view it as an integral part of their faith and cultural identity.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about economics and social order, but it's also about very, very deep-seated cultural and religious beliefs that really adds like another layer of complexity to this whole issue.
Absolutely. And we can't ignore the political dimension. Caste-based voting blocs are a powerful force in Indian politics. Certain politicians might even exploit those divisions for their own gain, further entrenching the system.
Oh, that's a sobering thought.
Okay.
It seems like we're starting to uncover why dismantling the caste system is such a monumental challenge. It's not just about changing laws, it's about shifting deeply ingrained mindsets and confronting, complex power dynamics.
You hit the nail on the head. And it's crucial to understand these motivations, even if we don't agree with them. Only then can we start to have meaningful conversations about creating a more just and equitable society for everyone in India. So it's clear that, the desire to preserve this caste system stems from like a mix of motivations, right? From protecting privilege to upholding social order and even religious beliefs. But we have to remember that this system has real tangible consequences for those who find themselves on the lower rungs of the social ladder.
Yeah, that's such a crucial point. We can't just talk about, abstract motivations. We need to understand like the human impact of all this. So what are some of the ways that the caste system continues to affect people's lives in modern India?
Yeah, well, one of the significant areas, I think, is economic opportunity. The caste system has created a very deeply uneven playing field,
Yeah.
and that impacts everything, from access to education and jobs to the ability to secure loans and build wealth.
So it's not just a historical legacy. It's a system that continues to shape people's economic realities today.
Absolutely, people from certain castes have historically held more land wealth and influence. And this kind of creates a cycle of disadvantage that's incredibly difficult to break free from.
Yeah, it's almost like starting a race with like a 100-meter head start. You're already behind before you even begin.
That's a great analogy. And it's not just about individuals, right? And entire communities are affected. Think about access to education, for example. Children from lower castes often attend under-resourced schools, and that limits their opportunities from a very young age. And even if they do manage to get a good education, they still might face discrimination when it comes to finding employment.
So even with the talent and qualifications, their caste can still be a barrier.
Sadly, that's often the case. And it's not always about overt discrimination either. There's also like subtle biases and prejudices that can impact hiring decisions, promotions, and even just like social interactions in the workplace.
Almost like an invisible wall.
Yeah.
Hard to pinpoint, but very real in its effects.
Exactly. And this economic inequality has broader societal implications as well. It can contribute to social unrest, political instability, and even violence.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that social hierarchies don't just impact individuals, they shape the fabric of an entire society.
Precisely. And we haven't even touched on the social stigma and prejudice that people from lower castes often face. They might be excluded from certain social gatherings, denied opportunities for marriage, or even subjected to verbal or physical abuse.
It's heartbreaking to think that in the 21st century, people are still being judged and mistreated based on something as arbitrary as their birth caste.
It is. And it's a reminder that we have a long way to go in the fight for equality and justice.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about what happens when Hindus migrate to other countries, particularly those with more egalitarian social structures. Does the caste system kind of lose its grip in those new environments?
It's a fascinating question, and one that researchers are still exploring. On the one hand, exposure to different cultures and values can challenge traditional caste norms. In countries where discrimination based on caste is illegal, people might be less likely to openly express, those prejudices.
So there's a possibility that the system weakens when it's transplanted to a different social context.
There's definitely potential for that. Think about younger generations who are born and raised abroad. They might have a weaker connection to the caste system and be less likely to adhere to its rigid hierarchies.
It's almost like the system loses its power when it's removed from the environment that sustains it. But does it ever truly disappear?
That's the debate, isn't it? Some argue that even in new environments, caste identity might persist as a form of cultural connection or social grouping within the diaspora.
So it might evolve and adapt, but not necessarily vanish completely.
Exactly. We're seeing examples of caste-based discrimination, even in countries like the US and the UK, where it's not legally recognized.
That's surprising and a little disturbing. You'd think that in a society that values equality, those old prejudices would fade away.
You would hope so, but the reality is that social hierarchies die hard. And sometimes they find new ways to express themselves, even in seemingly progressive environments.
It's like there's this tension between assimilation and holding on to cultural identity.
Oh, yeah.
And the caste system gets caught in that tug of war.
You've put it perfectly. It's a complex dance between embracing new values and preserving traditions. And the outcome isn't always predictable.
Wow, this is all incredibly insightful. I'm starting to see how deeply ingrained this caste system is. Not just in India, but potentially anywhere Hindu settles. But before we get too pessimistic, are there any positive signs? Any reasons for hope when it comes to dismantling this system both in India and abroad? It feels like every question we ask just kind of peels back another layer of complexity, from the historical roots to its economic and social impacts in India and abroad. It can feel a bit heavy, to be honest. I'm curious, are there any, glimmers of hope, any signs that progress is being made in challenging this really deeply ingrained system?
Well, there's no denying the challenges, but I'm an optimist at heart. And yeah, there are definitely reasons for hope. I think one of the most powerful forces for change is education.
Yeah, that makes sense. Education can broaden horizons and it challenge traditional thinking and empower people to kind of question the status quo.
Exactly. As more people, especially from marginalized communities, gain access to quality education, they become much better equipped to advocate for their rights and challenge discriminatory practices.
Knowledge is power. But it's not just about individual empowerment, right? What about like larger social movements or legal efforts that are kind of aimed at dismantling the caste system?
Yeah, there's a vibrant and growing movement for social justice, both in India and within the diaspora. Organizations are working tirelessly to raise awareness, fight for legal protections against caste discrimination, and empower communities to break free from that cycle of disadvantage.
That's inspiring to hear that there are people out there, actively pushing for change. But these movements often face resistance, don't they? What are some of the biggest obstacles that they encounter?
One of the biggest hurdles is simply the deeply ingrained nature of the caste system, right? We're talking about something that's been around for centuries, and those social hierarchies are woven into the fabric of many communities.
It's like trying to untangle a giant knot. You pull on one strand and it seems to just tighten all the others.
That's a great way to put it. And then there's the issue of political will. As we discussed earlier, caste can be a very powerful tool for political manipulation. And some leaders may be reluctant to support changes that threaten their power base.
So dismantling the caste system isn't just about social change. It's about political change as well.
Precisely. And we can't underestimate the role of economic interests either. As long as some people benefit from the cheap labor and social control that the caste system can provide, there will always be resistance to dismantling it.
It's a reminder that, power dynamics are always at play. And challenging those power structures is never easy.
Absolutely. But despite these challenges, I do think the movement for social justice is gaining momentum. More people are speaking out against caste discrimination, demanding equal opportunities, and working to create a more inclusive society.
Yeah, those are definitely glimmers of hope. Sounds like this is a marathon, not a sprint, and it's going to require sustained effort and unwavering commitment. So as we wrap up our deep dive here, is there any final thought you'd like to leave our listener with, something to kind of ponder as they continue to explore this complex issue?
I think that the most important takeaway is the understanding that the caste system is not just an Indian problem. It's a global issue that reflects these larger patterns of social stratification and inequality. And I think by recognizing those connections and working together across borders, we can create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
That's a really powerful message. It's a reminder that we're all interconnected, and the fight for social justice transcends national boundaries. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly insightful deep dive. I know our listener has gained a much deeper understanding of the caste system, its complexities, and the ongoing struggle to create a more just and equitable world.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, I encourage you to continue learning, engaging in dialogue, and using your voice to advocate for a world where everyone have the opportunity to reach their full potential, regardless of their caste or any other arbitrary social hierarchy.